3 years of beatings and abuse until a cowboy walked through the door. Emotional Wild West tale. Clara woke up to the soft light of dawn spilling through the thin, dusty curtains of her small room. The wooden floor creaked under her bare feet as she carefully stepped out of bed, trying not to wake the others in the house. Every morning felt the same, quiet, tense, and full of invisible rules she had learned to follow. She moved quickly, gathering the few clothes she had washed the night before, her mind already running through the chores she had to finish before breakfast. Her home was not a happy place. The walls were faded and worn, showing the years of neglect, and the furniture looked as though it had been there for decades. Clara often felt like the house itself was watching her, judging her for every mistake she made. She kept her head down most of the time, speaking only when necessary, and always careful to avoid upsetting anyone. Over the past 3 years, she had learned that even the smallest error could lead to days of feeling alone and unheard. As she stepped into the kitchen, she saw her younger siblings sitting quietly at the table. They were still too small to understand everything, but Clara knew they could feel the tension in the house. She smiled gently at them, trying to hide the worry in her own heart. She had always been protective of them, often taking on responsibilities that were far too big for someone her age. Making sure they were fed and safe had become a kind of quiet mission in her life, something that gave her a sense of purpose amid the long days. Clara moved to the stove to start breakfast. The smell of coffee and bread filled the air, but it did little to lift the heaviness she carried. She often imagined a different life, one where mornings were filled with laughter instead of worry, where she could go outside without feeling watched, where she could speak freely without fear. These thoughts were her secret, the tiny sparks of hope that kept her going even on the hardest days. Outside, the town was beginning to stir. Horses neighed as their owners prepared for the day, and the clatter of carts on cobblestones echoed through the streets. Clara pressed her face against the cool window for a moment, watching people pass by with their busy lives. To them, everything seemed normal, but Clara knew that normal did not exist for everyone. Some people had hardships that were invisible, stories that no one wanted to hear, and Clara's story was one of those. Quiet, hidden, and filled with a longing she could not yet put into words. After breakfast, Clara moved to the back of the house to tend the small garden. It was one of the few places where she felt a sense of peace. The soil between her fingers felt grounding, and the act of planting seeds reminded her that growth was possible, even in difficult circumstances. She hummed softly as she worked, a melody she had made up herself, one that carried all her secret hopes and dreams. The flowers she planted might not bloom immediately, but she knew that with care and patience life could grow in places she least expected. Despite the small moments of peace, Clara's life was often interrupted by strict rules and harsh expectations. She had learned to move carefully, to anticipate the moods of those around her, and to speak only when spoken to. Every word she uttered was measured, every step calculated. She had become skilled at staying out of trouble, but deep inside she longed for freedom. She wanted to run through the fields, to feel the wind in her hair, and to discover a world beyond the walls that confined her. Some days, Clara would sneak out to the edge of town, finding a quiet spot by the river. There, she could watch the water flow and imagine it carrying her away to a new life. She would sit for hours, letting her mind wander to far-off places she had only read about in old books or heard about from travelers. She imagined towns where people smiled freely, where kindness was common, and where a young woman like her could live without fear. These daydreams were her escape, her way of keeping hope alive, even when the world around her felt heavy and unforgiving. Her friends at school were few, and Clara often kept to herself. She had learned that sharing too much could lead to disappointment, and sometimes even ridicule. So she listened more than she spoke, observing the world around her with careful eyes. She noticed small acts of kindness, the way the sun hit the rooftops in the late afternoon, and the laughter of children playing in the streets. These tiny details were treasures to her, reminders that life could hold beauty even in dark times. Even though she was careful, Clara often felt the weight of judgment from the town. People whispered about her family, about her quiet demeanor, and sometimes about the misfortunes she could not control. She had learned to ignore their words, to focus on the life she wanted to create for herself, even if it was only in secret. Each whispered comment was like a shadow she carried, but it also fueled her determination. She promised herself that one day she would find a place where she could be seen for who she truly was, not the mistakes others believed she had made. At night, when the house was silent and the stars shone brightly overhead, Clara would sit by her window and write in a small, tattered notebook. She wrote about her dreams, her fears, and the small victories of her day. Writing was a way for her to speak when no one was listening, a way to express emotions she could not share aloud. Her notebook became a secret companion, filled with words that gave her courage, even if only in her own mind. Clara's life was a delicate balance between survival and hope. She carried the weight of responsibility, the burden of unspoken rules, and the quiet pain of longing for freedom. Yet, even in the hardest moments, she found ways to keep her spirit alive, through small acts of kindness, through secret dreams, and through the gentle hope that one day life would be different. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the creaking of the old house and the distant sounds of the town, Clara whispered to herself that she would not give up. She believed, even if faintly, that the world had more to offer than the small, confined life she had known. And somewhere deep in her heart, a tiny spark of hope began to grow, a quiet promise that change was possible, and that her story was not yet finished. The days passed slowly in Clara's small, sun-baked town. Each morning felt the same, with the pale light creeping into her room and the faint sounds of life outside her window. Clara moved through her chores like a shadow, her hands busy while her mind wandered to the places she longed to see. She watered the garden, fed the animals, and polished the wooden floors, all while trying to remain invisible. Every day was a test of endurance, but she had learned to carry it with quiet determination. Despite the routine, the world outside her home often felt like a distant dream. Clara would watch the townspeople go about their lives, farmers guiding horses, children laughing and playing, shopkeepers sweeping the dusty streets, and wonder what it would feel like to be part of it. She had learned to observe without being seen, quietly learning the rhythms of life in the town. Each smile she noticed, each act of kindness became a small treasure she held close. Clara often found herself thinking about freedom. Not the kind that came with loud declarations or sudden escapes, but the gentle, steady freedom of living a life without fear. She imagined walking through open fields, feeling the wind brush against her face and watching the sun rise over hills that stretched endlessly. In her mind, she could be anyone, go anywhere, and make choices for herself without worrying about consequences. These dreams were small, almost fragile, but they carried her through the long, quiet hours. Some days Clara's chores brought her to the outskirts of town, near the river that curved like a silver ribbon through the landscape. Here, the world felt different, quieter, softer, as if the river itself carried away the weight she carried. She would sit for hours on the banks, watching the water ripple and imagining it carrying her to new places. Occasionally, a bird would land nearby, its bright feathers a reminder that beauty existed even in places where life felt heavy. Clara treasured these moments, for they allowed her to breathe and to feel hope quietly growing in her heart. Though Clara tried to stay unnoticed, she could not escape the subtle judgments of the town. People would whisper as she passed, sometimes about her quiet ways, sometimes about the family she lived with. Children at school would glance her way, and teachers occasionally gave her looks that felt heavy with expectation. Clara learned to accept these glances as part of life, not as truth, but as shadows cast by others' understanding of the world. Still, each comment, each glance, reminded her that the life she dreamed of was not yet within reach. Even with the burdens she carried, Clara found small ways to bring joy into her life. She would collect wildflowers along the river, pressing them carefully between the pages of her notebook. She would hum tunes she created herself, letting the melodies drift through the quiet corners of the house. Sometimes she would write stories about the people she imagined lived beyond the town, giving them voices she longed to have for herself. These little acts were her rebellion, small but meaningful. They reminded her that even when life felt constrained, creativity and hope could flourish. Clara had a friend in the town, an older woman named Martha, who ran a small general store. Martha had lived in the town her whole life, and she saw more than most people. She noticed Clara's quiet strength and often offered small words of encouragement. Sometimes she would slip a fresh loaf of bread to Clara, or let her taste a sweet treat when the girl visited the store under the guise of buying supplies. Martha never asked questions, never pressed for explanations. She simply offered kindness, and in that kindness, Clara felt a rare sense of safety. Despite these moments of support, Clara often felt lonely. The weight of her responsibilities, the careful way she had to move through life, and the unspoken rules of her home created a wall around her heart. She wanted to connect with others, to laugh without fear, and to share her thoughts openly. Yet the fear of disappointment, of being misunderstood, kept her from fully opening up. Her life was a delicate balance of survival and hope, each day requiring careful navigation. School was one of the few places where Clara could see the world beyond her home, but even there, life was not easy. She paid attention to lessons with quiet focus, often excelling because she threw herself into learning as a way to escape mentally. Reading became her favorite activity. Books carried her to faraway places, taught her about people and customs she would never otherwise meet, and filled her imagination with possibilities. She imagined herself as a traveler, a hero, or even a quiet observer who could make a difference in someone's life. Each story added layers to her dreams and kept the spark of hope alive. At home, Clara's interactions with her family remained tense and careful. She had learned over the years how to move without drawing attention, how to avoid unnecessary conflict, and how to protect her younger siblings without being noticed. She often found herself taking on responsibilities that were far beyond her years, balancing the needs of the house, the animals, and the small garden with her own desire to explore and learn. It was exhausting, but Clara carried it with a quiet pride, knowing she was doing her best in a difficult situation. Evenings were the hardest time of day. When the work was done and the house grew silent, Clara would sit by her window and watch the town settle into quiet. Sometimes she would whisper her dreams aloud, telling herself that one day she would leave and find a life where she could be free. She imagined walking along roads that led to new towns, meeting people who would treat her with respect, and learning skills that would make her independent. These whispers were her secret promises, words of hope she repeated until they felt almost real. Clara also began to notice small changes in herself. She was growing stronger in ways she hadn't realized, mentally, emotionally, and even in her ability to plan for the future. She started thinking about what she could do if an opportunity arose, what steps she might take to create a better life, and how she could protect the ones she cared about most. This newfound awareness did not erase her fears, but it gave her a quiet determination she had not felt before. One afternoon, as Clara worked near the river, she saw a group of children playing on the far bank. Their laughter echoed across the water, bright and carefree. Clara smiled softly, watching their energy and freedom. She longed to join them, to feel that same joy, but she knew her place was still constrained by the walls she lived within. Instead, she observed quietly, taking mental notes about the way the world felt outside her home, open, bright, and full of possibilities. Even as Clara endured the quiet challenges of her life, small moments of beauty reminded her that the world was not all heavy. She noticed how the sunlight turned golden in the evening, how birds sang their evening songs, and how the wind carried the scent of flowers and soil across the town. These details became treasures, little reminders that life could hold wonder even in the midst of routine and responsibility. Clara clung to these moments, allowing them to fill her heart with hope. Martha, the storekeeper, remained a quiet source of comfort. She encouraged Clara to talk about her dreams, never judging her for the thoughts that seemed impossible in a town like theirs. Clara began to feel that perhaps not everyone was trapped by circumstances, that some people could offer help simply through kindness and attention. These interactions planted seeds of courage in Clara's heart, the realization that she was not completely alone, and that there might be people willing to support her in small but meaningful ways. The longer Clara lived with her careful routine, the more she realized that endurance alone would not lead to the life she desired. She needed more than patience. She needed courage and a plan. She began to think carefully about small steps she could take to grow beyond the constraints of her environment. She practiced small acts of independence, walking further along the river, visiting the store without fear, and speaking gently but firmly when she needed to. Each small action built her confidence, showing her that change was possible, even if it came slowly. At night, Clara continued to write in her notebook, chronicling her hopes, dreams, and quiet observations of the world around her. Writing allowed her to process the challenges she faced, to imagine new possibilities, and to create stories where she could be free. Each entry reinforced her determination, a reminder that one day she would leave behind the life that felt small and constrained, and step into the world she had always imagined. Though Clara's life remained difficult, she felt a growing sense of purpose. Each day brought challenges, but also lessons about patience, resilience, and hope. She realized that even small acts of courage could accumulate into meaningful change. And though she did not yet know exactly when or how her life would change, she held on to the quiet belief that it could, and that she would one day find the freedom she longed for. The town had never seen a stranger like him before. He rode into town one warm afternoon, his hat pulled low over his eyes, the reins of his horse held loosely but firmly in his strong hands. Dust clung to his boots and the edges of his coat, evidence of long days spent traveling the open plains. Clara noticed him from her window as he passed by the main street, the horse's hooves clicking softly against the wooden sidewalks. She felt a flicker of curiosity, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A mix of wonder and hope, a reminder that the world was larger than the small town she had always known. The man stopped at the general store where Martha was arranging jars of preserves on a shelf. Clara watched as he dismounted gracefully, his movements calm and deliberate. He greeted Martha with a polite nod and a soft smile, and though his voice carried a quiet strength, it was gentle, not commanding. Clara could see the way he listened carefully to Martha's words, responding with respect and patience. There was something different about him, something in the way he carried himself that made him stand out from the usual travelers or townsfolk who passed through. Over the next few days, Clara noticed him more often. He would appear in the town square, leaning against a fence or talking to passers-by with a quiet charm. The townspeople seemed drawn to him, though he never forced attention upon himself. Children whispered about the newcomer, and shopkeepers smiled politely as he entered their stores. Clara's curiosity grew with each sighting. She began to imagine what it would be like to speak to him, to hear stories of the places he had visited, and perhaps to feel a sense of connection she had almost forgotten was possible. One evening, as Clara walked along the riverbank, she saw him again. He was sitting on a fallen log, the horse tied nearby, sketching something in a small notebook. The sight surprised her, a grown man taking the time to pause and observe the world around him. It reminded her of her own small rituals, the quiet acts of creativity and hope that she practiced daily. She felt a strange sense of kinship with him, as if he too understood the importance of noticing the small details in life. Their first real conversation happened by chance. Clara had dropped a small basket of flowers she had collected for the store, and the wind had scattered them along the path. The cowboy bent down, carefully picking up the flowers and holding them out to her with a soft smile. "Here," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I think these belong to you." Clara's cheeks flushed as she took the basket from him. "Thank you," she whispered. There was something in his calm presence that made her feel safe, something she hadn't felt in years. He nodded, as if acknowledging the weight behind her words. "I'm Luke," he said simply. "Just passing through, but I thought I'd stop for a while." She felt an unexpected warmth, a feeling of comfort that seemed almost foreign. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she wanted to talk, to share a small piece of herself with someone who might understand. Over the next few days, Luke and Clara met occasionally by the river or in the quiet corners of the town. Their conversations were simple at first. Observations about the town, comments about the weather, stories of the countryside he had seen. Yet each encounter felt significant to Clara. She felt heard in a way she had not in years, and slowly she began to trust him. She told him about her love for reading and writing, about the small joys she found in her garden, and even about her secret dreams of traveling to new places. Luke listened attentively, never judging, never interrupting, always encouraging. One afternoon, Clara confided in Luke about her longing for freedom, about the life she imagined beyond the town's borders. He nodded thoughtfully, his eyes serious but kind. "You deserve a life where you can be yourself," he said quietly. "A life where your days are filled with choices and your heart can feel light." The words struck Clara deeply. She realized that she had not dared to believe such a life was possible, but hearing them from someone outside her world made it feel real. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine leaving the constraints of her home behind, to step into a life of possibility and independence. Luke's presence began to change more than Clara's thoughts. It affected the way she carried herself. She walked with a little more confidence, spoke with a little more clarity, and noticed details in the town she had previously ignored. The small acts of courage she had been practicing alone were now reinforced by someone who believed in her, someone who saw her not as a girl trapped by circumstance, but as a young woman capable of making her own choices. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, Luke invited Clara to walk with him along the river. The water sparkled with the reflections of the sky, and the air smelled sweet with the scents of wildflowers and fresh earth. Clara felt a sense of calm she had never known, as if the world had opened a small door just for her. "I've seen many towns in my life," Luke said quietly, "but I can tell that this one has something special. And you have a strength that's rare. Don't ever forget that." Clara's eyes glistened with emotion. She had spent so long feeling small, unseen, and unheard, yet here was someone who recognized her quiet courage, someone who made her feel that her dreams were not foolish or impossible.
She realized that, with Luke's support, she might finally take the steps she had only imagined before. Over the following weeks, their bond grew stronger.
Luke would share stories of the open plains, of sunsets that stretched endlessly, and of the people he had met along his journeys. Clara listened eagerly, her imagination painting vivid pictures of the world beyond the town. She began to believe that life could be larger, fuller, and brighter than anything she had known. With Luke's presence, Clara also felt a renewed sense of hope for her younger siblings. She began to consider ways she could help them experience more of the world, ways they could find moments of joy and learning despite the limitations of their home. Her heart expanded with the idea that she could not only change her own life, but also gently influence the lives of those she cared about most. One afternoon, Luke surprised Clara with a small gift, a simple leather notebook. "For your stories," he said. "Keep writing. Let the world know your thoughts, even if it's just for yourself." Clara held the notebook close, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. She realized that kindness and encouragement could be transformative, that small acts could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. Writing in her new notebook, she felt a freedom she had not felt before, a sense that her words mattered and that her dreams could take shape. As the days passed, Clara's world began to shift. The weight she had carried for so long felt lighter, not because her circumstances had changed entirely, but because someone had entered her life who believed in her. Luke's calm presence, his quiet strength, and his gentle encouragement became a guiding light. Clara began to see the possibilities that had always existed beyond the town, beyond her home, and even beyond her own doubts. Evenings became a time of anticipation rather than dread. Clara looked forward to seeing Luke, to sharing small thoughts and observations, and to imagining the life she could create. She discovered that courage often begins with small steps, a conversation, a smile, a moment of trust. And with each step, Clara felt more certain that her life was no longer confined to shadows and routines. One day, as they walked along the river together, Luke paused and looked at Clara with seriousness in his eyes. "I can tell you have been carrying a lot on your own," he said softly. "But I want you to know something. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Clara felt the swell of emotion, tears threatening to spill. For years, she had been alone, quietly enduring, quietly dreaming. And now, here was someone who not only recognized her struggles, but offered support, guidance, and hope. She realized that change was possible, that she could step into a future that was brighter, and that she did not have to wait for a perfect moment to start living the life she imagined. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows over the town, Clara felt a quiet determination settle in her heart. She had found a friend, a guide, and perhaps even a protector in Luke. But more than that, she had found a spark of courage, a reminder that her life could be more than what she had known. And though the journey ahead would not be easy, Clara knew that with hope, patience, and the right support, she could finally begin to create the life she had long dreamed of. The days grew warmer, and the sun stretched longer into the evening as Clara spent more time with Luke. Their friendship had grown steadily, built on quiet conversations and moments of trust. Clara found herself laughing more freely, smiling without fear, and imagining the possibilities that had always seemed out of reach. Luke's presence was like a gentle breeze through the long, dusty corridors of her life, filling her with hope she had never known. One afternoon, as they walked along the river bank, Luke spoke quietly, his gaze serious yet kind. "Clara," he said, "I can see you've been carrying a heavy load for a long time. You deserve a chance to live your life freely, to make your own choices and follow your dreams." Clara paused, her heart racing. She had thought about leaving many times in secret, imagining what it would be like to ride away, to see new towns, to breathe without the weight of constant worry. But the fear of stepping into the unknown had always held her back. Now, hearing Luke speak with such confidence and care, she felt a spark of courage she had never felt before. I don't know if I can," she admitted softly, her eyes on the rippling water. "It's hard to imagine life outside this town. Everything feels so fixed, so safe, even if it's not the kind of life I want." Luke nodded, understanding. "It's normal to feel that way, but you don't have to do it alone. We can figure it out together. Small steps, careful planning. You don't have to rush." Over the next few days, Luke and Clara met in secret, walking along quiet paths and hidden trails where no one could see them. They talked about everything, the roads that led out of town, places where she could find work, safe spots to rest along the way, and even ways to protect herself from unwanted attention. Each conversation made Clara feel stronger, more capable. She realized that freedom was not just a dream, but a plan she could follow if she took it one step at a time. Clara also began to notice changes in herself. She moved with more confidence, spoke with more certainty, and even laughed more freely with her siblings, who noticed a quiet brightness in her that hadn't been there before. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just for herself, but for them too. She wanted to create a life where they could feel safe and happy, where the future was filled with possibilities rather than limitations. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Luke presented Clara with a small, leather-bound map. "I've marked a few paths that are quiet and safe," he explained, "places where you can rest and find shelter. It's not a perfect map, but it's a start. You'll see the world beyond this town, step by step." Clara's fingers trembled as she held the map. For the first time, she could see her dreams taking shape in something tangible. The roads on the paper were more than lines. They were symbols of hope, of the life she had imagined for so long. It looks real," she whispered. Luke smiled. "It can be real. But we need to be careful. Planning is everything. We'll take it slowly, and we'll make sure it's safe for you and your siblings." Over the next few weeks, they practiced small preparations. Clara learned how to pack lightly but effectively, what supplies to bring, and how to move quietly without drawing attention. Luke taught her to observe her surroundings, to notice the signs of safety and danger in the environment, and to trust her instincts. These lessons were small but powerful, giving Clara a sense of control she had never experienced before. At the same time, Clara continued to live her everyday life in the town, keeping her plans hidden. She laughed with her siblings, helped Martha in the store, and carried out her chores with care. But inside she was growing stronger with each passing day, her confidence building quietly like a flame waiting to spread. One afternoon, while gathering water from the river, Clara spoke with Luke about her dreams. "I want to see mountains," she said, her eyes reflecting the sunlight on the water. "I want to see forests, rivers, and fields that stretch farther than I can imagine. I want to know the world beyond this town."
Luke nodded.
"And you will? One step at a time. You've been strong for so long, Clara. Now it's time to be strong for yourself." The planning continued in careful, deliberate steps. They discussed the best time to leave, ways to avoid being noticed, and how to ensure that Clara's younger siblings would be cared for while she began her journey. Each detail was considered, every possibility examined. Clara realized that freedom was not about running blindly. It was about planning, preparation, and courage. The night before they planned to leave, Clara could hardly sleep. She sat by her window, looking out at the town she had known all her life. It was familiar, safe in its routines, but it had never been a home in the way she had imagined. She felt a mix of fear and excitement, knowing that tomorrow she would take her first steps toward the life she had long dreamed of. Luke arrived quietly before dawn. He brought a small, sturdy horse for Clara, and together they checked their supplies one last time. The air was cool and still, and the first light of morning painted the horizon in soft shades of pink and gold. Clara's heart pounded with anticipation, but she also felt a calm resolve. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, and she knew she was ready. As they moved through the quiet streets, avoiding the main roads, Clara felt a sense of liberation she had never known. The town receded behind her, its familiar streets and buildings becoming a distant memory. With each step, each careful movement, she felt her confidence grow. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to live. Luke guided her along hidden paths, pointing out landmarks and safe spots along the way. Clara listened carefully, learning not just the routes, but the ways to move silently, to observe the world around her, and to trust herself in new situations. The journey was challenging, but every step brought a sense of empowerment and freedom. Along the way, they encountered small moments of beauty that made Clara's heart soar. She saw fields of wildflowers swaying in the breeze, birds gliding gracefully across the sky, and the river reflecting the morning light like a silver ribbon. Each sight reminded her why she had dreamed of leaving, to see the world in all its wonder, to feel its vastness and possibility, and to create a life that was truly her own. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Clara began to understand something important. Freedom was not just about leaving a place behind. It was about embracing the possibilities ahead, trusting herself, and stepping into a life she had always imagined. Luke's presence gave her courage, but it was her own strength and determination that carried her forward. By midday, they reached a quiet clearing where they could rest. Clara dismounted, feeling the horse's warmth beneath her hands and the soft grass beneath her feet. She took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air, the sunlight, and the feeling of choice, a feeling she had never experienced in her life. For the first time, she realized that she was not just a passenger in her own story. She was the author, the decision-maker, and the dreamer who could shape her own future. Luke smiled at her, a quiet, encouraging expression. "You're doing great, Clara. This is just the beginning, but you're already taking control of your life. Remember that." Clara nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and hope. She had endured so much, hidden her dreams, and carried responsibilities far beyond her years. Now, for the first time, she was stepping into a life where her voice mattered, her choices counted, and her dreams could take flight. As they continued on their journey, the town became a memory behind them, a chapter of life that had taught her resilience, patience, and hope. Ahead lay open fields, forests, rivers, and mountains, places she had once only imagined in secret. And with each step forward, Clara felt a quiet joy, a sense of liberation, and the promise of a life that was entirely her own. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of grass and earth as Clara and Luke continued along the quiet trail. For the first time in her life, Clara felt the open world around her, vast, alive, and full of possibilities. The town she had left behind seemed smaller now, not because it had changed, but because she had changed. She carried a lightness in her heart she had never known, a sense of courage that came from knowing she had taken control of her own story. Each step along the trail was a small celebration. The earth beneath her boots felt solid and real, and the horse beneath her moved steadily, strong and sure. Clara marveled at the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, creating patterns of gold and green that danced on the ground. Birds sang freely in the morning air, and she could hear the distant hum of life beyond the forest. Every detail reminded her that the world was bigger than she had ever imagined, and that her life was no longer confined to the walls of her old home. As they walked, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the long years of careful living, of carrying responsibilities she hadn't asked for, and of dreaming quietly when she thought no one was watching. She thought of her siblings, Martha in the store, and the quiet hope that had sustained her through so many lonely days. And now, with Luke by her side, she realized that hope had grown into action. She had not only survived, she had begun to live. Luke guided her through the forest, pointing out small signs that indicated safe paths and gentle places to rest. Clara listened carefully, learning how to notice the patterns in nature, how to move with confidence, and how to trust herself in a world that was new and exciting. Every lesson was empowering, reminding her that freedom was not just about leaving behind what was familiar, but also about embracing knowledge, courage, and responsibility. During a short break near a bubbling stream, Clara dismounted and let the horse drink from the cool water. She knelt by the edge of the stream, letting the current flow through her hands. The waters sparkled in the sunlight, reflecting the beauty of the day. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the journey, but for the small moments that made her feel alive. For the first time, she could breathe fully, without the weight of fear or worry pressing down on her. Luke watched her quietly, a gentle smile on his face. "You've come a long way, Clara," he said softly. "I can see the strength in you now. It's in the way you move, the way you think, and the way you notice the world around you." Clara felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride and relief. "I didn't know I had this strength," she admitted. "I didn't even know I could imagine a life like this for myself." Luke nodded. "Sometimes it takes someone else to remind us of what we already have. But now you see it for yourself." As they continued their journey, Clara began to notice the small joys that had been absent in her life for so long. The sound of leaves rustling in the wind, the distant call of a hawk, and the soft crunch of the earth beneath her boots were all small gifts that she now cherished. Every detail was a reminder that life could be beautiful, that she could find happiness in simple moments, and that her dreams were not just fantasies, but possibilities waiting to be realized. By midday, they reached a quiet meadow where the sunlight bathed the grass in golden light. Clara paused, taking in the vastness around her. She felt free in a way she had never experienced, a feeling that went beyond physical movement. It was freedom of the heart, freedom of the mind, and freedom of the spirit. She realized that she could finally choose how to live, who to trust, and what dreams to pursue. Luke watched her quietly, sensing the emotion she felt. "This is only the beginning," he said. "There's still much to explore, many choices to make, but you've already taken the most important step. You've decided to live for yourself." Clara smiled, a soft, genuine smile that felt like it had been waiting for years to emerge. "I think I understand now," she said. "Freedom isn't just leaving somewhere behind. It's stepping into something new, knowing I can shape it for myself." They continued through the meadow, and as they walked, Clara imagined the life she wanted to build. She thought of learning new skills, helping others, and seeing places she had only read about or dreamed of. She pictured herself walking through towns with confidence, greeting strangers with warmth, and sharing her stories with those who would listen. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time she felt fully capable of pursuing them. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Clara and Luke made camp. They sat together near the fire, the warmth of the flames mirroring the warmth in Clara's heart. She thought of the long journey ahead, not with fear, but with excitement. She knew there would be challenges, moments of uncertainty, and days when the road would feel long. But she also knew she had the courage to face them, the knowledge to make wise choices, and the support of someone who believed in her. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. The vastness above her, the quiet hum of nature around her, and the steady presence of Luke by her side created a sense of belonging she had never known. She realized that her life was no longer defined by the past, by limitations, or by fear. She was free to dream, free to explore, and free to create a life that reflected who she truly was. Over the next few days, Clara and Luke traveled through forests, crossed gentle rivers, and walked along open fields that stretched farther than she had ever imagined. Each day was filled with discovery, the way sunlight shifted through the trees, the sound of wildlife, and the beauty of landscapes that seemed untouched by time. Clara took careful notes in her notebook, capturing everything she saw and felt, preserving these moments as reminders of her journey. During one quiet afternoon, Clara spoke about her dreams for the future. "I want to help people who feel trapped," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "I want to show them that life can be different, that they can find hope, even in hard times." Luke nodded, proud of the clarity and compassion in her words. "You already inspire others, Clara. You've shown courage, patience, and kindness. The world will be lucky to have you making a difference." The journey was not always easy, but Clara faced each challenge with determination. Steep paths, sudden rains, and long stretches of walking tested her endurance, but she met each obstacle with resilience and patience. She learned that strength was not just about moving forward, but also about knowing when to rest, when to observe, and when to trust her instincts. With each passing day, she grew stronger, wiser, and more confident in her ability to navigate life independently. One morning, as they reached the top of a hill overlooking the valley, Clara paused and took a deep breath. The view stretched endlessly, filled with green fields, sparkling rivers, and distant mountains. She felt a sense of awe and gratitude knowing she had reached this point through her own courage and determination. She realized that the journey itself had changed her, that she was no longer the same person who had quietly dreamed from the shadows of her home. Luke stood beside her, quietly observing the view. "This is your world now," he said softly. "You can shape it, explore it, and fill it with the life you've always imagined." Clara smiled, her eyes shining. "I know. And I will. I'll make choices that reflect who I am, and I'll keep moving forward no matter what comes next." As they descended into the valley, Clara felt a sense of excitement she had never known. The valley represented opportunity, adventure, and growth. She knew that the journey ahead would continue to challenge her, but she also knew that she was ready. She had discovered her strength, embraced her freedom, and learned that hope could be transformed into reality with patience, courage, and careful planning. By evening, they reached a small village where they could rest and resupply. Clara observed the villagers with curiosity and warmth, noticing the smiles, greetings, and sense of community that had been absent in her old town. She realized that life could be filled with connection, support, and kindness, and that she could find a place where she belonged without sacrificing her dreams. Sitting by the fire that night, Clara reflected on the journey she had taken. From the long years of quiet endurance to the first spark of hope that Luke had brought into her life, she had grown in ways she never imagined. She had learned patience, courage, trust, and self-belief. Most importantly, she had discovered that freedom was not a single moment, but a series of choices, each one building toward the life she had always dreamed of. As the stars glittered above, Clara whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. My life is mine to live, and I will make it beautiful." The fire crackled softly. The night air carried the scent of earth and grass, and Clara felt a sense of peace, excitement, and hope. She had left behind the shadows of her past and embraced the brightness of a new beginning. With Luke's support and her own courage, she knew she could continue to explore the world, face challenges, and shape a life filled with freedom, joy, and purpose. For the first time, Clara truly felt alive. The long road had taught her resilience, the importance of hope, and the beauty of small moments. Now, standing on the edge of a vast and promising world, she was ready to step fully into her own life, confident that whatever lay ahead, she could meet it with strength, grace, and courage.